Hi, my name is Hajar, and today I'm going to be interviewing Miss Adrien Wing from the University of Northern Iowa. Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm from the University of Iowa.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah. Miss Wing, I've noticed that you have done a lot from your time, like traveling with school, and you're a professor at Iowa. It said you're a,
Law professor.
yeah, for the Sun Murray professor or something like that.
Yes, well, I have a title, and the title I have as a professor is the Bessie Dutton Murray Distinguished Professor of Law. And that's a title that indicates that someone donated money in the name of that person. And so it's an honor to have a title as a professor like that. And so it means that I've published a lot and I'm recognized internationally for the work that I do.
That's great. How long have you been living in Iowa?
I've been living in Iowa 23 years now, and it's gone by really, really fast. I came here from New York City. I thought, oh, maybe I'll be here a couple of years. And I've ended up being here and raising a family and really, really loving it.
So, from your move from New York to Iowa, was that the biggest transition? Did you come from school, or did you just decide to move?
I was a lawyer, an international lawyer in New York City, practicing 4 years with a large law firm and then 1 year with a small firm. And the reason I came to Iowa, people often ask me, how did you get to Iowa from New York? Is because at that time I was married to a man named Rico Melson. And Rico is a medical doctor, and he was assigned by the U.S. government as part of his obligation to the Public Health Service to go to places where there are not enough doctors. And so the Meskwaki Indian settlement in Tama was a place that needed a doctor. And so at the same time that that was maybe going to happen, that he was going to get assigned to Iowa, I was invited to give a speech here at the University of Iowa Law School by a professor, Burns Weston. And I came and gave the speech, and I said, I might have to move here to your state, and what would I do as an international lawyer? And he said, would you like to be a professor? And it was something I had thought about before. I come from a family of educators, but I wouldn't have become a professor at that moment, and I wouldn't have moved from New York City to become a professor. And so it was just this fate where I happened to be following or needing to follow a husband. And so we came here, and it worked out fabulously well.
That's wonderful. Like, if you, without moving to Iowa, where do you think you would end up now if you weren't in Iowa?
I probably would have become a professor maybe in a few years after that time, but I only would have considered being a professor in either New York, where I had just been, and I'd also grown up in the New York, New Jersey area, or in California, which is where I was born. And I went to graduate school for a master's at UCLA, and I went to law school at Stanford in the San Francisco area, and so I might have considered living out in California, but nothing in between.
From Iowa.
So I'd like to think that ultimately I would have become a professor, but on one of the coasts.
I know that you noticed you've traveled a lot. Like, what are your travels based on your international law? Or?
Yes. As a lawyer, I'm a specialist in international and comparative law. And then within that, I specialize in Africa and the Middle East. And then also, I'm the director of Iowa Law School's summer program in France. So this summer will be my 11th year going to France for 5 weeks. And then this semester, it's my first time as the law school's director of our semester program in London. So I happen to be in Iowa City for a few days right now in the middle of the semester, so I could do this interview. But otherwise, I'm based in London for the semester. So some of my travel nowadays has to do with being the director of study programs for law students. And otherwise, a lot of the travel, I get invited to do conferences and be a speaker, or I'm doing research in mainly Africa and the Middle East, but also sometimes, like last summer, I gave lectures in Indonesia, and also I lectured last spring in New Zealand and Australia. While I'm based in London, I went over to Barcelona, Spain, and gave a lecture. So, and while I'm here, actually I'm here in the States because I gave a lecture on Wednesday in Florida at Florida A&M Law School. And I spoke yesterday at my own law school, and then on Tuesday I'm going to USC to do a lecture, and then on Friday I'll speak at UCLA. So I just have been fortunate enough to do a lot of traveling, primarily in the U.S., but of course also internationally. And a lot has to do with these speeches and talks about my specialties. And people say, well, what are your specialties? I focus on women's rights in Africa, the Middle East, and in the United States. And I also focus on race and gender. So I'm interested not only in general women's rights, but on the rights of women of color, of black women. How are we treated because we're discriminated against based on both our race and our gender? So people will do something to me, and it's because I'm a black woman, not just a black or a woman. So this intersection of discrimination on the basis of race and gender is a specialty of mine, and I'm known worldwide for this, and so that's part of the reason I get invited to places. And then also I said the Middle East. Part of my specialty involves the Muslim world, the Middle East, in particular the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So there's always a lot of requests for me to speak on that issue because it's an ongoing global problem. And so I've been focusing on that area of the world for about 28 years now.
I can see that's something you hold near and dear to your heart. Mm-hmm. Is that something? Is the reason why did you get so close to that specialty or that certain era or that part of studying?
Well, for studies, I mentioned I got a master's degree at UCLA, and that was in African studies. But I got involved with the Middle East not because of my academic training when I was a student, but when I was a lawyer, Rico, who was a new doctor at that point, volunteered to go to the Middle East during a war that was happening in Lebanon. And so we were young and in love, and I went with him, and so he worked in a hospital, as a physician, and I worked in the hospital as an administrator. And right after we left that location in Lebanon, there was a terrible massacre of Palestinian and Lebanese civilians there. And so after that, the fact that we survived that war and also that where we were working, many people we knew were killed, we decided that we would each become more involved in the Middle East. And so I learned, studied, and then started preparing myself as a lawyer. So when I was your age, in high school, I had no idea I would have any interest at all in the Middle East. I knew I might become a lawyer, but I knew I liked Africa. And I knew I liked race issues back then. The civil rights movement was going on. But I would have never imagined that I would become an expert in the Middle East. So a lot of things can happen to you in your life just because of who you meet and who you're with and current events.